Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dager, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Susan Fowler. Susan educates leaders on motivation's best practices based on solid science, communicated through compelling storytelling, case studies, and real-life examples. Susan is dedicated to providing leaders around the globe with cutting-edge framework, dynamic model, and pragmatic course of action to shape workplaces where people flourish while producing sustainable results. She encapsulated all this in her book, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work. Susan, I would like to thank you for joining me, and your book was published, I think, a couple years ago, and do you have a new version of it now coming out, or update? What's going on? What's new news about it?
Well, we do. It's a paperback version, so it's a bestseller in hardback, which is really cool. But Joe, I have to tell you the rest of the title, because it's Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does. You kind of gotta do the and what does.
That's kind of a key point, isn't it?
It kind of is.
Well, I have to tell you, what really jumped at me after I read your book and I looked at it, and then when I saw your bio on a press release, what I was really intrigued by was your education, a degree in anthropology. Okay, because this has become my new favorite field of study. You have to tell me, how has that field helped you, and how did it lead in to learning more about motivating people?
Wow. Okay, so nobody else has ever asked me that question. I've never even thought about it, but now that you mention it, I was an anthropology major because I really cared about culture. I cared about what made human beings act and behave the way they did. And it was really interesting because I was at the University of Colorado, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Morris Massey, but he was really famous years and years ago for a program called What You Are is Where You Were When. And anthropology students were recommended that they go sit in on, he was the dean of the business school, and go sit in on that program, and I did, and I was absolutely fascinated. He was really talking about values and how values really determine our ultimate behavior. And anyway, long story short, 30-some years later, I'm actually working in that whole field and look back at that moment when I sat in on Dr. Morris Massey's class, became a business major, and then really started just being curious not only about what moved us as human beings, but specifically what our work environment does to us, and how our values and how the people that we are, that we bring to work, affects our productivity, our mental and physical health. And all of that led me to the work of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. I've been studying it for almost 25 years now, very involved in the academic community of self-determination theory, and it all just came together. So, whoa. That was a really interesting question for me.
Yeah, no, because I talk to SaaS company now, and I tell them you all need to have an anthropologist on your workforce, okay?
Yeah.
Because that culture, the value, those are the big words we're hearing about today.
Absolutely, and for me, it's fascinating. I mean, human beings are infinitely fascinating, and this time of our lives, especially what's happening in the world, I can't get enough of it.
Everybody looks at motivation, and the first thing they think of is Dan Pink's, work in it, and his seminal work in it, and, the Drive book. And tell me, did Dan get it right? Okay, is your book different, or does it follow some of the same principles?
Well, it's I think a really interesting story. When Dan's book came out, I cried because I thought, he beat me to exposing to the mainstream world the work of these wonderful scientists, especially in the self-determination theory world. Also, they'll realize that Dan, being a phenomenal journalist and writer and speaker, needed to, I guess, take the information and find a way to disseminate it that was easily digestible. And so now I thank Dan Pink for, I guess, paving the way for people to be open to the fact that there's extraordinary science behind motivation. I think what also, though, happened is that, for example, he boiled motivation down to intrinsic and extrinsic. And there's a real issue with that, because let's say that you're in sales and you're trying to figure out what intrinsically motivates people. And you can't find, for example, any intrinsic motivation for doing Salesforce, where you have to input all the sales data. And so what happens is executives then think, well, this salesperson is not intrinsically motivated to use Salesforce. And so they figure they have to default to the outdated and traditional ways of motivating, which is extrinsic. So let's give them an incentive, let's bribe them, let's give them a reward. And so the problem with the simplicity of the intrinsic and extrinsic model is that by default, it perpetuates what we know doesn't work.
The reason to read your book is because it reinforces similar thoughts, but it goes maybe a little bit deeper dive, for lack of a better word.
I think it does two or three things. One, it's based on the same scientific theory. It is valid, but I guess it's more pure, but also it's applied. I had the privilege of spending 7 years literally traveling around the world, not just talking about motivational theory and research, but actually working with organizations who are applying it. So from China and India and all over Europe and all across the United States and South America, we have organizations that right now are changing the way they work using the model and the framework based on the scientific methodology.
You've kind of broken it down into what, 3 needs?
Well, I didn't do that. So let me just clarify, and either did Dan. People give Dan credit for coming up with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. In my book, we call it autonomy, relatedness, and competence, because those are the 3 psychological needs that have been identified and validated by research. What Dan calls purpose, the academic community calls relatedness. And the reason that I think it's important to keep the academic term is because purpose is like a sliver of relatedness, but relatedness also includes the importance of interpersonal relationships. The fact that if you feel manipulated or used, or you don't feel cared about, or if you are in an organization that doesn't allow you to care about others, then your psychological need is going to be eroded. So it's much greater and grander and more complex than purpose, which then gives us other opportunities for developing relatedness at work. And then mastery is a bit of a misnomer because it's really about competence. It's about our feeling of growth and learning every day. So our psychological need is not in feeling like we're masters, but it's our need to gain competence on a daily basis. So the very fact that our basic nature is to learn, sometimes we forget that. So one of the little tips I give leaders is at the end of every day, instead of asking your people, what did you accomplish? How many cold calls did you make? Did you finish this project? Why not ask people, what did you learn today? What did you learn today that will help you be better tomorrow? And so there's some really simple, wonderful techniques that you can use if you really understand what's underlying those 3 psychological needs of autonomy, relatedness, and competence, which we refer to as ARC.
You call motivation a skill. So you're saying that we can practice it and we can develop it, right?
Yeah, if think about this, how often, Joe, we say this about other people, oh, they're just not motivated, or, well, they're motivated, or I'm motivated. The fact is that people are always motivated. So the reason I say why motivating people doesn't work is because people are already motivated. The question is why. The reason for people's motivation is what really matters. It's the quality of their motivation, not the quantity, that we need to pay attention to. So once we understand that, then we as individuals or as leaders in organizations can really start to understand and frame the way people are motivated. And thereby we can, as a skill, learn to either shift our own motivational outlook or facilitate someone else's shift. So motivation is absolutely a skill. It's not something people either have or don't have. It is a reason that you're doing something, and our reasons can change.
Then I think of this leader that's got hundreds of people to motivate, and motivation's kind of a individual type thing. Okay, you know what?
Yeah.
So how do you break it down? And maybe go down those different levels of leadership. I mean, that's tough to be able to pass that. I want to motivate people, but can I really just give an edict and do it, or how do I do it?
Well, first of all, we've just got to take that out of our terminology. We've got to stop saying motivate people. We've got to stop holding managers and leaders accountable for something they cannot do, which is motivate people. So that's just a total misnomer. So what we usually use instead is we got to drive people. We got to drive for results. There's a chapter in my book called The Danger of Drive. And drive is just the opposite of our psychological needs. And so if you're having to drive people, it's probably because their psychological needs have been eroded in some way. But let me just answer your question. Motivation works at 3 levels, okay? It works at the individual level. So you can have the skill of motivation, I can have it, and we can implement it anytime, we want. Leaders can have the skill of motivation, which is facilitating us through like motivational outlook conversations or helping promote our mindfulness or helping us align to values. So we teach leaders how to have those conversations and the best practices for creating an environment where people are more likely to be optimally motivated. But motivation also occurs at the organizational level. So what we know about motivation absolutely should be influencing or informing systems, processes, procedures. So, for example, I'm working with a lot of organizations right now to literally change their reward and recognition system, to change the way they go about setting and rewarding goals. So it happens at 3 levels.
That seems a fairly large undertaking, okay? So does it always have to be driven from the top? I mean, can I start motivating on my own?
Yeah, we use that word driven. Everything's driven.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
It just has permeated our psyche. I'm sorry, I'm a kind of a driven diva.
I think that's a great thought.
I have to tell you, I just have to tell you a little story. I got a call from a major CEO of one of the top 2 brokerage companies in the world who had read my book, flew me to New York, met with me, and asked me to work with his 200 top advisors. And he literally went through their communications, their internal communications, and eradicated the word drive from their vocabulary, from all of their written materials, because what he realized is that if he really wanted to create an environment where people were doing their work for the right reasons, that were doing their work out of the common good, for reasons other than external reward, incentives, bonuses, ego, all of the, all of that stuff, then he really had to help people see that it wasn't about being driven. It was about other more fulfilling reasons to do their work. So just wanted to share that with you. It was really fascinating that he really saw that whole kind of pressure, because what happens is we create pressure, and the opposite of people thriving in the workplace is feeling pressured. I don't know where we ever get the idea that feeling pressured produces results. Watching the Super Bowl last night, I think the thing that really defines people like Tom Brady and Matt Ryan is that they're cool under pressure. In other words, they're not pressured. They can be in a pressure situation, but they have the skill to deal with that pressure. Most people don't. Most people actually get frustrated, tense. They're not as creative, they're not as innovative. And by the way, those guys are exhausted afterwards. So if you're constantly in that kind of pressure in the workplace, you burn out. So I don't know where we got that idea that pressure actually produces optimum results.
Well, and I think of it, and I'm going to jump to something I know fairly well, is in the gaming world, okay? Gamers,
Yeah.
all right? That intenseness, okay, that's involved in a game, but they're really in a state of flow. The good ones really get into that flow, and when you're in flow, there isn't pressure, is there?
No, there's not. It's really fascinating because there's some people within the academic community that are doing a lot of research and work with gaming organizations around the world, because one of the things they realize is that addiction to gaming, which can become obsessive passion, is due because if you think about the 3 psychological needs, games are set up to give you autonomy. You make choices, you feel like you're in control, and you live and die by, or almost, literally, I guess it's figuratively with your game, live and die by your choices. You also gain competence. There's different levels, and you're constantly getting feedback around your competence. What's missing most often is a sense of relatedness. What's the purpose? What's the underlying meaning? Are those relationships with the people that you're gaming with meaningful relationships, or are they false? And so China is the first country to actually declare addiction to gaming as a neurological disorder, and they actually have camps now to try to help. They feel like they've lost an entire generation, especially of young men, but young men and women, to the addiction of gaming. So what we have to understand is that intrinsic motivation, we can get in the flow really easily, but if there isn't a sense of meaning, purpose, or if it damages our interpersonal relationships, or if it damages our relationship with ourselves, our bodies, our health, our well-being, that moves from intrinsic to obsessive passion, which is actually a real negative. I'm sorry, was that too much of a rabbit hole?
Oh no, not at all. Because as I'm sitting listening to this, I'm thinking of the gaming side of it, and when you think about that relatedness, okay, and the top gamers, when they really start forming and bonding as a team, is when they go to the land events, so they get that direct contact with people.
Yeah.
And,
well, if you think about
they have to deal with each other.
Yeah, but that's for a very select few, and usually people who are a little bit more on the higher status financially, economically. So there's a whole group of young people that aren't getting those experiences. And can I just speak as someone who is addicted? I was addicted to Candy Crush, actually Candy Jelly. And if you look at my little model here, can you see that?
Yes,
Joe. This little bubble here is called inherent motivation, and that's where me playing Candy Crush resides. I play Candy Crush because it's just pure fun. I can't even tell you why I like it. I just do. It's fun. Now, what keeps me from just doing it 24/7, what keeps me doing it just as a break set or as a little relief from my daily activities, is this kind of motivation, aligned or integrated motivation. The aligned motivation is when I realize that I'm doing something because it is aligned with a value I have, or because I'm integrated, because I have a sense of purpose. And so if I'm really clear on the goals that I have that are aligned to my values and are integrated to my purpose, that's what will keep me from playing Candy Crush to distraction. So this is why I think understanding the spectrum of motivational possibilities is so important. So again, I'm just going to use a salesperson. There might be a salesperson who is in sales because they just inherently love talking to clients and helping them, with whatever it is they need. If they don't want to do Salesforce, or they don't want to make cold calls, or they don't want to fill out their expense reports, the way that we're going to get them to do those kinds of activities will never be because they love them. It'll always be because we've been able to help them align those activities with values that are meaningful to them or some kind of a deeper sense of purpose. So that's why I think it's just so important that we don't think of motivation as this simplistic, intrinsic, extrinsic. It's more robust, and it gives us a lot more opportunities to help people be more optimally motivated in the workplace.
Well, you went down this hole, so I'm going to follow up with it, okay?
Oh, dear.
Being a sales or marketing person, how can I use that? Can I think along the same line to motivate customers?
I say to leaders who come through our training that you cannot motivate anyone if you're not optimally motivated yourself. So imagine if you are an executive needing to do performance reviews, and you hate performance reviews, but the purpose of that performance review is supposed to be motivate your people. I can just tell you it's not gonna happen. You're gonna fail. The same thing is true with anyone in sales. If you have salespeople who are in the suboptimal part of our model here, who are selling because of the bonus, the incentives, those are called external motivators. Maybe it's because they want to be number one in the ranking, they want to go on the sales trip. Or if you have a salesperson who is, for example, introducing a new product because they feel like they have to. Sometimes the carrots that we give them actually become sticks, like, oh, I have this pressure to go on the sales trip. I have a pressure to introduce this new product so I can win get the bonus. It's just amazing how that works. So if you have a salesperson who is externally or imposed motivation, then they are not going to be as successful with their customers as a salesperson with optimal motivation who, for example, has a value around solving problems or service. Now, you asked me about customers or clients. Absolutely. So I'm working right now with a diet center. And what we're really saying is the service that you provide, what we really need to do is to frame it. How is your service giving people a sense of autonomy? How is your service providing relatedness and competence? And so if you understand how your product or service is actually creating optimal, a chance or a potential for people to be optimally motivated because their psychological needs are being satisfied, then this will really work. And I get really frustrated when I read articles about successful people, and it's all about how they succeeded instead of the why. Because it's why you're selling, it's why you're trying to succeed that matters. People, say, well, some people are really competitive. I'm really competitive. But the best competitors are not competitive because they want status and ego boosting. They're competitive because they use competition as a measure of their own excellence, because they love to learn and grow. They have values around excellence. And competition is merely a measuring stick. It's like the scoreboard. But a great athlete doesn't keep their eye on the scoreboard. The scoreboard is simply data that helps them understand how they're using their skills. So, so I just really feel that you can use this information with customers, and you just really have to use it with yourself first, because if you don't, your customer's not going to respond.
Well, I like the idea that where you brought in about the use of the product. I like the idea of, that you got to motivate yourself and, have the right things there. But what if I recognize where a customer is in that spectrum of motivation, and maybe he's not as totally motivated? Okay, do I match him? How do I match up to that and think about it?
Joe, let me just give you I don't know if this is a great example or not, but let me just talk it out loud. Like charitable organizations that depend on their customers for donations. Studies were done, for example, that sent out letters asking for donations and said, would you please donate $10, $25, $50, whatever. And they give you those little boxes, right, to check off how much you're going to give. And they did that in one mailing. In another mailing, they did the same boxes, but they added a box. Sorry, but I'm not able to give at this time. So giving them an option to say no. Guess which mailing had by far the greater response? It was the one that gave people an option. Why? Because it was supporting their autonomy. It was giving them a choice. Autonomy is a person's perception of choice. So if your marketing or if your approach creates fear, what if you, have an ad that says, if you don't do this, something's going to happen to you? I can think of, this again, probably a silly example, but back in the day, I was in advertising. I was in advertising and marketing. And feminine hygiene deodorant was used as a huge example of a problem that a lot of people didn't even know existed until they created a product for it and advertised it. And they used fear as the primary method for promoting that product. And it didn't last long. It was like one of those things where it had a big upside and then just, it went into decline. Where you're going to see longevity, where you're going to see it work is when we don't base our advertising or our marketing approaches on fear, anger, or self-righteous indignation, but instead we're giving people choices. We're showing them how your product is going to actually create better relationships, meaning, a sense of purpose in their lives, or that's going to teach them something. They can learn something. So that's just the underlying. That's what we're really trying to do.
Most of my listeners understand the art of, let's say, deliberate practice and spaced repetition, or kata in the lean world. And we start with a vision. We're going to motivate the company. We're going to start getting going. We're going to provide ways for motivation. What would be maybe a good way to get started to improve the way we motivate? Maybe a focus question or something like that we could ask, and a couple small steps to get started.
Well, first of all, can I just say that the way you frame metrics is huge. So organizations have to have metrics, but very rarely do organizations frame those metrics in ways that are meaningful to people. They don't help people relate to those metrics on a personal basis. Another thing that happens is that when you're creating that vision with values, I see organizations all the time saying, here's what our organizational values are, and then they stop. They don't ask individuals, what are your values? How do your personal values align with our organizational values? So it's really hard as a leader to try to help people align their work to meaningful values if people don't know what they value. And so having those kinds of conversations with people, or those kinds of efforts, if you have, for example, a new product and you bring it out and you put incentives on that product, ask yourself, why are you doing it? Why do I feel like my people need an incentive to sell this product? Is it because I don't think that product was worthy? Is it my people don't feel like our customers are going to want it? So I guess when it comes to getting lean, it's really about, and I'm not talking about Simon Sinek's why, although I think that's brilliant. What I'm asking you is to really think about the way it gets framed. So what I'm doing, for example, with pharmaceutical companies who are notorious for incentivizing everything, what I'm doing is saying, here's how you frame it. This new product cost X million dollars for us to develop. We believe that it can save X number of people's lives, or influence or affect or make better X number of people if they only know about it. Because this drug is so important to the marketplace and to the welfare of our own organization, we are giving incentives for its sales, but that's not what we want you to use as motivation to sell it. We're just using that incentive as a declaration of how important this is to us. So it's the way you frame it. It's the way you set it up. And I think that a lot of leaders don't do a good job of thinking through, here's what we're saying, here's how people are going to internalize it.
So, in lean, we have a thing that we call a catch-ball, that we go ahead and we pass, let's say leadership starts and provides a vision, and then they throw it, down to the next level, or down to the next group, and they come up of how they can what they think will work and what will get them to do, and it throws it back up, and you play catch-ball, to phrase it back and forth, and it cascades down the organization, so everybody has a little bit of input. Everybody has a way to motivate themselves or express it in their terms and be part of that whole way of it, implementing something or practicing something, may be a better word. Can I do the same thing with motivation? Can I do the same thing?
Can I no.
Okay. Good. No, that's great. That's great.
No, I don't even think you can do it with the things you just mentioned, and I'll tell you why. Because you're playing catch with people who don't know the rules, because you're playing catch with an uneducated workforce, because people don't know enough to know what to say and how to say it. I'm just looking at our democracy. A democracy depends on an informed electorate, and we don't have people who are educated or understand some of the basic premises of a democracy. Our democracy suffers. The same thing is true. Can I just give you an example? I work with organizations all the time who are spending millions of dollars on employee engagement surveys and initiatives. And then what they do is they create these action teams, and they give people all these low results and say, okay, come up with actions that are going to improve our engagement. And so what people do is they come up with stupid tactics because they don't understand the nature of engagement. They don't even understand the root cause of engagement. And what they don't understand is that a person's daily motivation is what informs engagement over time. And people who have suboptimal motivation will end up disengaged, and people who have daily optimal motivation will end up engaged. And so if you don't understand that dynamic, and you're letting everybody have input, but they don't even understand that the ideas they're coming up with actually erode their own psychological needs, they don't even understand the nature of their own motivation, they don't understand what helps people truly thrive, then we keep coming up with ideas that are actually unwittingly eroding the very thing we're trying to promote.
So where does the autonomy fit in?
Well, you can give people choices, but you have to, that's a beautiful thing about these three psychological needs of autonomy, relatedness, and competence. They have to be done in cohesion. You can't give people autonomy without competence. If you don't teach people what they need to understand to be autonomous, then it backfires. People who have total freedom but no skills to cope in that type of environment are going to flounder. So you can't have competence. You can't have autonomy without competence. You can't have competence without relatedness. You can't have relatedness without autonomy in order for us to truly thrive. So those three things really need to be integrated. And that's really the skill of motivation. So, for example, I was working with an organization that wanted to implement a mentoring program. And what they did is they say, okay, we're going to ask people if they want to be in a mentoring program. Okay, they thought they were giving them autonomy. And then what they did was they paired the mentors and the mentees. They did the pairing. Well, all the science around mentoring says that mentoring happens through chemistry. You really have to have aligned values, you have to care about each other, and you can't force fit people. So the fact that they were giving people autonomy but weren't, and then didn't have an internal mechanism to educate people about each other so they could make good choices, and people didn't understand what each other's values were, and they didn't have a way to promote that. They were just going to spend all this money on a mentoring program that was doomed to fail. So that's where this science of motivation really comes into play in helping people understand how to structure initiatives.
We can say that we would need a coach, a trainer, someone to help others to develop this practice, right?
Can I just say that coaching and working with a person's motivation are two very different things. So, number one, I believe very much in coaching. I think it's can be a profound technique and a gift to people who have coaches. The thing about coaching is that coaching is about problem solving. Coaching is about moving forward. It's about getting people to move forward, right? Don't think about the past, worry about the past, but build on the past and move forward. A motivational outlook conversation is about going deep. It's about asking, why are you motivated or not motivated to move forward? If you're doing problem solving with someone who is suboptimally motivated around the problem, you could do all the problem solving you want, and it's like building a castle on sand. So coaching to move forward will be much more effective if before the coaching, people actually learn, if leaders would learn the skill of having motivational outlook conversations to help people understand the reasons for moving forward and really understand the depth or not of their own motivation.
Well, you have some type of outlook assessment, right, on your thing that I can go check myself out, or is that right?
Yeah, there's a free motivational outlook assessment on my website, and it's really fascinating. It's really quick. It only takes you like maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and you'll get immediate results. So if you pick a specific goal and keep that goal in mind as you take the assessment, then it will give you immediate feedback about whether you're suboptimally or optimally motivated. And it's just a fun thing for people to see. And then also on my website, if you go to the book page of my website, there's a free download of a couple of chapters of the book, and there's amazing resources there. There's WebExes and white papers and, just a lot of free resources if people are interested.
Well, could you give me the URL of your website?
I could. It's www.susanfowler.com.
Is that the best way to contact you and learn more about the book right there?
It is. It is. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I would like to thank you very much, Susan. I could probably go on, okay, and listen to a lot and get you, because you dive into your work. I love it, okay?
And I'm sorry if I went off on some things a little bit too much, but I am passionate about it, Joe, and I can't believe just how grateful I am that you're interested and you gave me the opportunity to talk about the ideas. I hope your listeners got something of value.
I'm certainly they will. So I would like to thank you, Susan, and thank everyone for listening to the podcast today. This podcast will be available on the Business 901 website and the Business 901 iTunes store. So thanks to all the listeners for listening.